Thank you for joining me this morning. I know you're very busy and you're traveling a lot. You are an academic and scholar and an haiku poet. Now, which one came first?
Oh my goodness, yes. I think the academic came first. Definitely. I hadn't heard of haiku until well into my academic career, actually. So the academic career came first, and then I encountered haiku, sometime in the probably in the early 1990s or mid 1990s, but I can tell you exactly when because it was a particular book published in 1992. Or I probably picked it up in about 1999, yeah, just before I came here, called the Haiku 100, published by the British Haiku Society that I found in a bookshop, and that was my first contact with haiku. So I was a well-established academic by that time.
I was wondering if we could talk about haiku right now through the lenses of your career, even
Yes,
though haiku came later, and probably you discovered it also through your travels.
yes, yeah.
Um, You are a registered nurse with a PhD in biochemistry.
That's right. Yes. Yeah. Oh, nursing. Oh, yeah. Okay. Oh, yeah. That's a long story, but I'll make it short. People always say that when they make it long, but yeah. The short story is when I was an undergraduate student at the University of Edinburgh, where I did biological sciences. I worked in the vacations as a nurse or a nursing auxiliary in a hospital, and I absolutely loved it. And when it came to the end of my first degree, I wasn't sure what I was going to do. I had a PhD in mind, but I thought if I don't get in a good enough degree to get a PhD place, I'll become a nurse. But I got a 2-1, which is what I needed to be a PhD student, and then went to do my PhD. Completely forgot about nursing. Absolutely never thought about it again. And then I'd had 12 months experience in total. Then when it got to the end of my PhD, I still liked biology and biochemistry, but I was completely fed up working in laboratories. I couldn't stand another day of looking at test tubes and looking at machinery and really not getting anywhere. That was not inspiring me. And I just had a sudden, desperate moment of what am I going to do? And a thought just came into my head really about what about nursing? And I made the decision there and then, before I'd finished my PhD, that once I'd finished, I was going to train as a nurse. Or in those days, it was training; it wasn't education. There were no degrees in nursing, and I did it. And I must say, uh, beyond what you're asking, but I've never regretted that decision because I've never been out of work, and I've travelled the world, and I've had an academic career and a clinical career on the back of it. So it was a good decision.
Your focus is on gerontology, nutritional difficulties, and mealtime in people with dementia.
That's right. Yeah. Yes. When I went into clinical practice, I didn't immediately go into clinical practice after I qualified, because I had a PhD already, which was unusual. A job came up to lead a research unit within the National Health Service in the UK, but funded separately. And I got the job. I went into that job without any real clinical experience, and it was kind of in the area of gerontology. It was looking at pressure ulcers or decubitus ulcers or whatever we call them now. Pressure sores, I think they're called by lay people. I really felt the lack of clinical experience. And then the unit I was in moved to another university, and it wasn't really convenient for me and my family to move, and a whole load of circumstances came together. So I left that, spent a little time trying to do some journalism and learn how to write, and then went back into clinical nursing. That was another decision. I thought, no, I've got to get back into nursing and get some clinical experience. And that happened to be in a unit where older people were looked after, what would be called a geriatric unit, I guess. And I absolutely never expected to really enjoy that, but I did. So I spent 3 years working in that unit, and most of the people there had some form of dementia, and all of the ones with dementia had some form of what we tend to call mealtime difficulty now, difficulty feeding themselves, basically. And it was a huge problem regarding the workload that we had to do. So that became my area of interest and research, and that stayed with me for over 30 years.
Always thought that haiku would be a good form of expression
Yeah,
for people with dementia simply because they are shorter and their emotions stay
yeah,
intact
yes.
until the very end.
I suppose you're right because with sort of cognitive decline and memory problems, it might be more difficult to remember longer pieces of poetry. I have enough difficulty remembering long pieces of poetry. I can only remember the pieces I learned 40, 50 years ago at school. I can't remember anything I learned recently. But yeah, you could well be right. And of course, procedural memory remains for a long time in people with dementia. So it could be something that they could be introduced to. But actually, it's a novel thought. It's a novel thought. And I heard it here first because you told it to me first. I'll have to look into that one. And I will look in to see if haiku have been used with people with dementia, because people have used poetry therapy and literature therapy and things like that. So there are precedents for it.
What I find that it's very characteristic to your poems is
Mm.
the contrast
Yeah,
you put in your poems. For example, even when humor is present, for example, you're saying it's prayer time, we're going for cocktails,
yeah, yes,
which is extremely, nobody would think that at the prayers call they would go for cocktails.
yeah, yes,
Or I'm in the airport arriving or departing, which are now the airport could be a live stage.
yeah, yeah,
And arriving and departing, it's coming into the world and
yeah,
leaving, two different
yeah.
things. There's a lot of contrasts in and they're humor, but some of them are very philosophical.
Haiku's very much of the moment, and I think it depends, one, on what you've just seen and experienced, and also on how you feel. And sometimes those things sort of come together. I think one of my dark ones refer to economies of scale regarding older people dying. I think that one. I remember where I wrote that one, and it was in Taipei Airport on the way, or on the railway station on the way to the airport. And it was something to do with an advert I saw about. It was almost like two for the price of one. Funeral plans, and I think I used Chat GPT or something like that, or Google Scholar to translate what it was saying. But I realised it was about funerals because I don't speak Chinese, and I thought, wow, even here economies of scale. So that was quite a dark and a bit of humour as well. So yeah, you're quite right. But haiku is about contrast within the structure. Haiku are seasonal, so not all of mine are haiku because some of them are what would we call senru. They're about human behavior. But one of the key things about haiku and senru usually is a sort of an inflection point or a cut point or what's called a karigi, I think they call it in Japanese, where you say something and you lead someone sort of up the garden path and then you say, but this actually happened, so you'll see a lot of that in a lot of haiku, really. That sort of element of surprise.
Haiku written in English language, they are really, as you said, very different from haiku in Japanese, which tend
Yes,
to be
yes,
even more cryptic.
yes.
Are measured in breath,
Yeah.
where
Mm.
in English it's a bit more difficult to do that.
Yes, yes, absolutely. Japanese haiku. I mean, I'm in fewer haiku societies now because I'm sort of retired now, and you got to rein things in a little bit financially. But the World Haiku Association, which is a Japanese association, and they still very kindly keep in contact with me. I find the translation of Japanese haiku is quite difficult. They often don't translate very well, and I don't always find them clear, humorous, or making the sense out of them. And you're right regarding the difference in English haiku, and of course there are some people argue you can't possibly have haiku in English and all that kind of thing, but we approximate the Japanese sort of haiku. But again, as you said, haiku in Japanese is very much about we call them syllables, but as you say, it's breaths or sounds. So out of that grew this sort of myth in English haiku that it had to have 17 syllables and be 575 and all that stuff, whereas it doesn't. But Japanese ones tend to follow that structure because of the Japanese language, which I don't speak, but it's to do with the way that Japanese is spoken, I believe. Early English haiku had 17 syllables, 575, and that was one of the biggest revelations to me when I realized, looking back on, for example, on the Haiku 100, once I'd learned a bit more about haiku, that actually these don't have 17 syllables and they're not necessarily in that structure. And that was what really intrigued me about it. Anybody can do this, you know. So, yeah, and I think that's the thing about haiku. Anybody can do it if they apply their mind to it.
When do you find yourself more productive in haiku? When you're in Europe or when you're traveling?
Yeah, that's a very good question, because there are arguments about this within the haiku world about when it's best to be creative. Some people find that when they're at home, in familiar surroundings and something unusual happens, that's when they create more. And some people find it's when they're in unusual circumstances and seeing unusual things. And I find a little bit of both, but I think most of my haiku have probably been written when I've been traveling, because of unusual things that I've seen, or just having the time to contemplate and think. But on the other hand, I have written a great many in our former house. We've moved since I wrote most of my haiku. We live in a smaller house with a smaller garden now. We lived in a huge house with a huge garden before, completely isolated, and I found that was a really good place to write, because I could watch the pigeons and the birds, and I had a koi pond and we had cherry trees and all these sort of things, all the typical haiku things, and I found that more inspiring. I don't find where we are now quite as inspiring haiku wise, you know.
You are of Scottish extraction.
That's right, yes.
Where does your Scottish background come in?
Oh yeah, well I think we Scots have got a particular sense of humour, and often a very dark sense of humour, and we're also very. I think we're lyrical. I haven't really written any other poetry apart from haiku. I've tried, and I'm hopeless, and that's again what attracted me to haiku. But we have a huge, a big tradition of poetry in Scotland. Walter Scott being one, but of course most famous being Robert Burns. I find, looking at Burns, I think there may be some examples on my haiku web page. I can't remember now, but I've often found little small parts of many poets. Poems look like haiku, and of course, Burns. There are little bits of Burns that I remember that were like that. And he wrote about nature, he wrote about people, he wrote about politics. His view was very wide, and I think we Scots feel we're a kind of poetical, literate kind of people. I think that's a rebellious kind of people as well. So I think haiku encompasses, that's all encompassed in haiku.
It's interesting that you come from a place where a lot of people go to
Yeah.
to run away from things, to stay
Yes.
away from things.
Scotland, yes, that's true. Yes, yes, that's right. I mean, I don't live there. I've lived in England longer than I've lived in Scotland, purely because of employment and marriage and children and things like that. That's true. Scotland is a place for people to go for recreation, and indeed, for many years when we first lived in England, we would go back to Scotland for camping, mountaineering, rock climbing, that kind of thing. So it has that on offer. It's got a huge amount of Scotland is completely unpopulated, so it's got huge wilderness essentially. So not wilderness like you've got in Yosemite and places like that, but where I've been, but it's got that wilderness. So people go to escape, but yeah, and I think possibly. And also places like the Lake District, which is up north in England, people go there to escape, and that's got a huge legacy of poetry. William Wordsworth, Coleridge, all these people, they were the Lakeland poets basically, and I think the wilderness inspired them. So I think that's part of it. Yeah.
You are the editor of several journals,
Yeah.
and you have given talks on ethics, on writing articles. You're very organized. Did that help you to write haiku?
Yes, I think it definitely did, because I'm very. I think it's fair to say I'm obsessed with writing. I mean, I write all the time. I mean, I've just put something up on a WordPress site for someone else this morning. I write several articles a week, and I don't write quite so many academic articles these days, but I edit a lot. And haiku just fitted into that very nicely. It was something I could do with with a notebook, sitting on a plane, basically, or sitting on a train when I couldn't really do anything else. So it was very attractive from that point of view. I rarely set aside time to do it, but I think where my sense of being organised, maybe obsessive compulsive, came in was getting them into some kind of order and trying to get some published. I mean, that's what academics do. So I just applied that to the haiku world, and I've been reasonably successful in getting some published. So yeah, so I think it's all part of the same aspect of my personality.
You co-authored several articles on COVID
Yes,
and
yes,
the challenges that
yeah.
nurses are facing, and some of them are leaving the profession.
Yeah, yes, yes, I did. I have to say that I mean, I think we discussed this before the this podcast, and I said I don't write quite as many haiku these days as I used to. I still write. I mean, I try and get one published at least every issue of the Life Spirit, which is the journal of the British Haiku Society, and I probably write one or two a month these days, where it was prolific before. And I think that the COVID era absolutely, it almost killed my spirit, what was happening then. And I mean, I won't say too much, because if this is going on YouTube, some of what might say might trigger the YouTube bots to take it down. I was not in accord or congruent with the measures we were taking, basically, to combat COVID. I thought they were over the top, unnecessary, and nurses were on the front line and having to do things that were probably unnecessary. So yes, I've written a lot. And in fact, since the COVID era, which I like to call it, I've written several hundred articles about that and other related things. And in a way, that almost took over my writing impulse, and I've got to try and make room, or sometimes haiku penetrate that. I think, oh, there's a haiku. I'll get it on my iPhone and capture it and put it online. But I think the whole COVID era, which we've got to get over at some point. I've got to get over it. But it was a singularity. It really disrupted the world. It disrupted my profession, and put many nurses under the spotlight who maybe didn't agree with quite what was being done all the time there. But that's all I'll say. I won't go into too many details, because I say that YouTube's very sensitive about COVID, and I have had things taken down before. I won't mention certain treatments or certain specific measures, because believe me, they're hot on these things.
You've been married to Deborah for
Yeah,
decades and you have 8 children.
that's
Did you
right.
travel around with all of them?
No, we didn't. It was always something I thought we might do, but we decided pretty early that it was going to be too difficult. And I mean, I travel a lot with Debbie, and with the children. I mean, my children are very lucky, because they've been to lots of different places, either as a group or one or two of them. They've been to Australia several times. They've nearly all been to Hong Kong, places like that. All the places I go to. But we decided that we would try and make a base in the UK. I did work abroad for a short period in Ireland. It doesn't seem very abroad to people who don't live in the UK, but it is a different country. But we didn't move. It was just too difficult, and it was short-lived for that reason. So we haven't done the sort of sabbatical in the States, bringing the whole family over. There were just too many of them, and it was just too difficult to contemplate, really. Short answer to that is no. We haven't travelled around with them all, but they've all been very lucky to travel, and I'm very lucky. Yeah.
You're Roman Catholic.
Yes.
How does your faith help you with your profession and also as a poet?
My faith certainly helps me with my profession. I think I often think it was an intervention from above that brought me into nursing. Although I wasn't really a believer in those days. But I think God has to speak to atheists, or there wouldn't be any converts. But no, my faith is pretty central to it. I wouldn't say that I'm the best demonstration of a good Catholic in what I do. That would be a very tenuous claim, but it does guide certain aspects of what I believe about what we do. I mean, the sanctity of life at the beginning and the end, very controversial at the moment, particularly at the end of life. I feel these things are immutable, and so that so it really does. And I think my working with older people, I felt that was a really important thing to do. You know, I never really, once I got into that, I never really wanted to get out of it into more acute areas and more, I suppose you could say, glamorous areas. I felt it was an important job because older people pass away. Many of our older patients died, and I saw death on an almost daily basis. But I thought it was nursing played a very important part in that. So yeah, so it has played a role, and I've written about aspects of my faith related to nursing. But with poetry, yeah, I suppose it's just being open to that, what people call the still small voice. Sometimes that still small voice can be a bad thing, but I think I think haiku might come from a similar sort of place, really, just being quiet and listening to things, listening to the moment, and recording it. So there probably is some link. Um, I have written about, whether Catholics should practice haiku or not. It's not a controversial area, but it's been something I wondered about, given that haiku has links in Buddhist culture and Buddhism and Zen culture, things like that. And some people find mixing and matching of faiths a very difficult thing to do. And but I've never really had a problem with that. There's a very famous haiku poet called Raymond Reislip, who was a Jesuit poet, a very accomplished haiku poet. So there's never been a problem for Catholics, but I had to think out: am I getting into something that is away from my faith here, or is it wrong? But I think I just had to think these things through, and so yeah. So I suppose it's helped me, but I don't often write about religious themes. I often write about churches and things like that, but not specifically about religious themes, whereas some people do, and it doesn't really work. The one thing you've not got to do with haiku is to try and preach, not to speak about, people speak about the environment, about peace and all these things, but it doesn't really work. It's got to be, as Raymond Reislip said, it's got to be about a rather horrible metaphor, but it's got to be the arrow penetrating the deer, when a deer's being shot, that's what a haiku is. It's that specific moment, and that's what haiku's about, really.
Uh, Talking about hunting, you do have a haiku poem on about a pheasant who
Yeah.
hears the dog,
Yes.
the hunting dog,
Yes.
and the guns.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, yes, it's an image you get out in the countryside around here now and again. There are lots of. We have another place up in the north of Yorkshire where we go at weekends, when we can, and the fields are full of pheasants at this time of year. They're all bred for shooting. I mean, they're not really wild, and they all walk about. You could probably pick them up. You wouldn't have to shoot them, but you do hear the guns now and again, and the dogs in the distance, and it's just that was just an image, and I just imagine I imagine the pheasant hearing it, but probably doesn't realize what's happening. If he doesn't get out of there quick, he's going to be someone's lunch very soon. So, I think that was where that one came from. It just came from seeing a pheasant in a field, and then when we were out walking, hearing guns and hunting dogs. So yeah.
I was wondering if you have some of your earlier poems
Yeah,
pending.
you did prompt me, and I don't know if how all of these are earlier ones. I've got some later ones too, but it was funny. I couldn't remember what the first haiku I'd ever had published was, and it was in 2017 in Blythe Spirit, the Journal of the British Haiku Society, and it was just this. I don't know if it's a haiku, a senru, or really what it is, but it obviously took the editor's fancy, and it was a three-line haiku called "Watch Hands." No fingers pointing to time, meaning a watch, watch hands, no fingers pointing to time. I just thought, it's got hands but doesn't have fingers, so that was one, and I was just amazed that it got published. I mean, I thought I'll give it a go, and he published it, so that was it. And another really early one, which really surprised me. I haven't got these very well organized, I'm afraid, Leanna, but was another, which isn't really a haiku, more of a reflection. And this was because in my office I've always got a shredder next to me, and we shred all our confidential documents. Silent shredder. That was the shredders. A silent shredder, graveyard of all my thoughts. When I write something I don't like, it goes into the shredder, you know. So silent shredder, graveyard of all my thoughts. And what astonished me about that haiku was I sent it into the Vladimir Davidi Haiku Award. This is a European haiku award, and it was commended. And I thought, wow, in my ignorance, I sent it in, and I thought, you know, okay, we'll see how it goes. And it got commended in 2018, although I wrote it in 2017. So those were sort of really early ones, and I suppose they're not my best by any means, but they were the ones that the fact I got them published and somebody was interested was what kind of inspired me. Yeah, yeah. But I've tried, you know, since then to be more haiku-ish in some of them, and more behave, you know, more senru-ish and other about behaviors. And some of my earlier ones are certainly haiku. You can tell because I've got sakura blossom on the koi pond, two legends meet. So this is my koi pond in our other garden. So the cherry blossom gives it a seasonal reference. It's sakura blossom in the UK, so it's this time of year now because the cherry blossoms out in the other gardens here. On the koi pond, on my pond as it lands on the pond, and they're both sort of haiku legends. You know, koi because of their longevity, and sakura blossom feature a lot. So I thought sakura blossom on the koi pond, two legends meet. So you know, that's the breaking point too. You've got the natural thing, the koi pond, and then what's he going to say about this? You know, two legends meet. And I've been very lucky to have some published in a Japanese newspaper, the Mainichi, which is the Japanese daily newspaper. I think Mainichi means daily. I've had several published in there, but one of my early ones in 2020 was An Oblivious Bee Zigzagging Between Headstones. Again, seasonal because the bees out, and you know, just the way bees just randomly go about, you know, and visiting. I saw one in a graveyard just popping between headstones, you know, and I thought that's what I'm doing really. I'm going to look at these headstones, but the bees doing it too. But he's oblivious to what the significance is. But I'm doing something you should never do here with haiku, which is my big fault. I'm trying to explain them. Just, you know, you should just say them and just get them done, you know. 2018. This one moves me a great deal because it's about my mother, and it's again it's haiku. May Dew, the month of May. May Dew, mud on my mother's hands. And this was published in the Wales Haiku Journal, which is difficult to get into. And one of my best haiku has been published there. And it's also been translated into Irish by someone who did it for me. And the point behind the haiku, and I'm explaining it now, is in May, the 1st of May, which is today, there's a tradition of in Celtic countries of women washing their face with May Dew. You know, you put your hands in the dew and wash your face. It's supposed to make you attractive, to find a husband and all the rest of it. It's the Beltane festival in Gaelic. And I just remember my mother doing this once, and there were worm casts and there was mud, and she got mud on her face, and it's kind of moves me because my mother was someone for whom things never quite went right, and I thought this was typical of my mum, you know, who's passed away many years ago. So that one sort of was a memory of that. That was a haiku from my memory, you know, May Dew, mud on my mother's hands. Yeah, so those are some of my earlier ones, but you know, later ones I've got again seasonal references. Like the seasonal reference doesn't always have to come at the beginning either. Morning chill turns to warmth, Pentecostal bells. You know, out walking in an early morning in Pentecost Sunday, and you hear the church bells ringing. You know, and the sun's just beginning to break through the cloud. So again, it's seasonal because Pentecost's coming up fairly soon. And a burst of snowdrops on the mortuary road, last journey home. This is the mortuary. I'm ex-military, and I've got children in the army too. And living on a base, the mortuary was actually just not far from the house where my daughter lived recently. And on that road in spring, there were snowdrops. And I was just thinking, you know, for many soldiers coming back, you know, from war zones whatever, the mortuaries where they were prepared for their burials. The last journey home was past these snowdrops. And I don't know how many more you want, but I do want to read. I do want to read this one, which is the one I sent you the YouTube about, because someone kindly made a YouTube about it. Again, published in the Wales Haiku Journal, was "Frozen Mountain Stream: The Percussion of Unseen Pebbles," and that I was, again, it's very difficult to get into the Wales Haiku Journal, and that was one of the last ones I had published. I've failed ever since, and that one was inspired by memory of walking in the Cairngorm hills in Scotland during winter, and when the ponds are frozen you can hear the stones bubbling up and hitting the ice underneath. And that reflection was also in a book called The Living Mountain by Nan Shepherd, who's a famous Scottish poet, and I should have her books on my shelf behind me there somewhere. And Nan Shepherd was a woman who she now features on the Scottish Bank of Scotland £5 note. So if you get one of those, Nan Shepherd is on that. And I was lucky enough, because a friend of mine is the executor of her estate, and I remember actually meeting Nan Shepherd when I was very young and not realizing who it was. And then when I came across her book of not a book of poetry, but a book of reflections on mountaineering, and she was a real pioneer, because as a woman she went into the mountains alone, which was not recommended for anyone. And I realized I'd met this woman, and she wrote about frozen streams, and I remembered, being in the same place as she'd probably been in and seeing these frozen streams. So Frozen Mountain Stream: The Percussion of Unseen Pebbles, and again, definitely a haiku because it's got winter in it.
You mentioned these people coming back from war. You actually worked for a hospital during the first Gulf War.
Yes,
what was it like?
Yeah, well, I'll be honest with you. I mean, I was in the military reservists for a few years, and in the medical corps as a nurse. And of course, when the first Gulf War came, we'd been preparing for the Russians coming across one way, and then we're all sent off to the Middle East to this unexpected war. It actually wasn't too bad, I'll be quite honest, because we were at the furthest back sort of echelon. We were a general hospital. They don't exist in the military now. There's only field hospitals, but we were a hospital which would receive from the front lines and then transport people back home. So we weren't really in the acute line, but I mean, it was we did have patients, and we had some we had the occasional death on the ward, but we didn't have many patients. But we treated British Army soldiers who were part of what's called the A-10 shootout. It was an unfortunate blue-on-blue situation where a friendly aircraft shot a British armoured personnel carrier, and there were 8 men in the carrier, 4 on each side, and 4 of them were just killed instantly. And we had to deal with the other 4 who were deafened because their eardrums had popped, and very traumatized by it. So that was one memory I have of that. Otherwise, it was intermittently frightening, because we had Scud missiles. One damaged a bit of the hospital, and one landed just right outside the gate of our camp. That was the nearest we came to any danger, and I won't forget it. And I was terrified. How do you react when a missile's coming in to kill you? It's terrifying. You could hear it whistling in, and the huge explosion, that sort of thing. But that was it. Other than that, we had a fairly good time. We were co-located with American forces who got the swimming pool going, and we were also co-located with French troops, and their chefs did the cooking. So we had the best of both worlds at the camp. Yeah. But it introduced me to the Middle East, and I've done a lot of work in the Middle East since then.
You are a teacher. What are you teaching these days?
Well, at the moment, mostly what I teach, because I'm retired in the UK. I live very close to where I used to work, but I actually work in the Far East now, in Hong Kong, part-time. and I'm in the middle of contracts in China. Mostly what I teach is about either methods for carrying out research, and I'm particularly into quantitative methods and statistics, which isn't surprising given my science background, and also about writing for publication, not just about how to write academic articles, but how to do it ethically, how to improve your writing, and also trying to keep up to date with latest developments, the latest of which is ChatGPT and AI, which is good at creating haiku, by the way. But so trying to, at the moment, I've just written an article. How do we as editors and how do authors cope with the temptation of ChatGPT, and how do we as editors deal with the possibility of people using it? So that's mostly what I do. And now and again, I give keynotes at conferences on sort of wider issues to do with publication. So that's it. I don't do much in the way of clinical teaching these days. I'm way out of practice, but occasionally I'll talk about my research into feeding difficulty in older people with dementia. But again, I've kind of left that behind. My last PhD student did an excellent project, but that was a few years ago, so I'm not up to date with that research at the moment.
We are seeing more and more breakthrough research
Mm.
into dementia.
Mm.
Do you see something positive coming in the future sooner?
Well, I'm not that optimistic. I'll be absolutely honest. For several well, I'm a biologist and by background, so I know how difficult it is to treat the brain chemically. I mean, we can do it ourselves with alcohol and drugs, but to do positive things in the brain, apart from the classic one being Parkinson's disease, which is to some extent treatable, it's very difficult to get things into the brain across the blood-brain barrier and to get them in there in a way that they're effective. So that's one sort of pharmacological challenge. And I'm not a pharmacologist, I'm talking slightly outside my area of expertise there. But also, we don't really know what causes dementia. I mean, there are two, major theories. One is, to do with proteins going wrong and transmission across membranes. The other's to do with, again, to do with proteins, but to do with bits of the brain sort of dying off. And we don't really. There's not a unifying theory of what Alzheimer's disease, for example, is. That's the main cause, and that's the one that everybody wants to treat. And these breakthroughs are often more fanfare than substance. It's you read in the press, and I just read something in the Global Health newsletter yesterday from the Johns Hopkins University. Yet another breakthrough in dementia, and we've had so many of them. And maybe I'm just a pessimistic Scot, but very few of them prove to be of any real benefit in the long term. I really don't think there's a cure for dementia, but time may prove me wrong. I don't think there's any aliens on other planets, but time may prove me wrong on that too. But so far, no. I mean, I think what you've got to realize is that the brain of someone with dementia is really devastated. I mean, in terms of just the volume of the brain. If you take a section of the brain of someone with dementia, there's nothing there in some of the lateral regions. It's just shrunk away compared with someone who's normal. We don't know why that happens. You certainly can't reverse that because the brain's just not that plastic. Whether you can prevent it early is difficult to know. There are drugs which offer some relief in early stages of dementia, but the effect is very minor, and it's not sustained, and it's very expensive. So there's been a bit of false hope there with some of the drugs like rivastigmine, and I think that's how you pronounce it. Sorry, I'm not that optimistic about breakthroughs in dementia. The one thing that seems to protect you from dementia is choosing your parents wisely. There's not a huge genetic component to the actual development of Alzheimer's disease, but it does seem that people who have higher levels of mental ability when they're young are the people who tend to avoid dementia when they're older, and also make the proper sort of life choices. And that's been demonstrated by a very good colleague of mine in the Lothian birth cohort study in Scotland, where they studied millions of people from 1921 and 1928 who'd had their mental ability, that word that nobody likes, IQ, tested as children. They brought them all back, the ones who were still alive, thousands of them years later. The 21 cohort will be thin on the ground now, but the 28 cohort still around, and their mental ability had not changed on the whole, unless they had dementia. And the ones who had dementia often had made life choices which weren't so good, smoking and drugs, and hadn't kept fit and all that kind of thing. So, it's complicated, but I think a lot of it may have to do with luck. So not a great. That said, I do Wordle every day to try and keep my brain stimulated.
If we worked with people with dementia at different stages to write haiku-like poems, do you think we could get a glimpse of what's happening in their brains? Do you think that their haiku poems might reveal things about how their brains are working that we do not see in research otherwise?
Yeah, it's an intriguing possibility, I have to say. As I say, I'm not sure it hasn't been done. I'm going to try and find that out, and I will, of course, let you know. But it's possible. I mean, certainly in the very early stages of dementia, I mean, people sadly are often aware now that they've got dementia from a very early stage, but they can still function pretty well. I mean, I'm astonished how many people with dementia still live alone. People with early stage dementia can still drive. It's not obviously there's a point beyond which that isn't possible. So yeah, it's an intriguing possibility that if we ask them to record their thoughts, and I think some writers do this and record the process of dementia, but haiku might be something that would draw out other insights. I suppose you're also dependent on whether they could write haiku in the first place. Not everybody wants to do it or can do it, and not everyone's interested. So it's an intriguing possibility. It certainly is.
People think that haiku is mostly for educated people.
Yeah. Yes, well, yes, I think they probably do, and there's been an awful lot of intellectualizing and such like about it. And my bookshelf there, I think there's something like three sections of my bookshelf is full of haiku books and journals. So there's been an awful lot of that about it. But not everybody that I meet in the British Haiku Society, in which I'm not quite so active these days, but not everybody I meet is an intellectual or an academic by any means at all. But some people are. But that may be haiku. How do I say this sensitively and without being insensitive to people who don't write haiku? But perhaps haiku is a product of maybe that kind of analytical or reflective mind, that's both analytical, reflective, and can write. So there might be a constellation of things in the kind of people who write haiku, rather than the other way around. You can't do haiku because you're not this, but maybe it's because you're this way inclined that you write haiku. That may be the case. But no, not everybody by any means is an academic. Some very fine haiku poets are not in any way academics. There's a mixture, and of course, like anything else, it requires refinement and a bit of training and a bit of judicious editing, and being told, as I have to do with people with academic articles, that isn't good enough, that's not a haiku, that's been done before, that idea isn't new, what about this, so it takes a bit of fellowship to improve your haiku.
What are your projects for this year? Not only in haiku, but in general.
Right. In general, well, yes. In haiku, I mean, I have to say, it is always in my mind to write more and get back into it. And I must thank you for contacting me, because it's made me revisit some of my work and want to write more. So that's one thing I am going to do. But no, my projects for this year are really to, I do have specific research projects, for example, in Hong Kong. One is I'm still trying to get money from out of the institution I work in to carry out a study there into mealtime difficulties and dementia. What we're essentially doing is repeating a study that was done in Italy by a PhD student of mine, an excellent study. So we're trying to see if we can repeat that in Hong Kong. We haven't obtained the funding yet. Other project which is really interesting and which I'm only a co-applicant on is to develop a chat bot, chat GPT type platform within the school to help nursing students to cope with new placements. So like the first ever clinical placement, their training or education's interspersed with clinical placements. So it's a time of huge anxiety. So we're trying to train a chatbot to give them suggestions or answers or specific things to do if they feel anxious about the placement, if they make a mistake, which we all do. How do I do that? I don't feel I'm fitting in, that kind of thing. So some of my previous research into the transition between being a nursing student and a qualified nurse, because many of the anxieties are the same, I've used and fed that into the chatbot to try and train it to give suitable answers. So that's one project I'm very interested in, and which we're also going to try and tie that chatbot into a knowledge base so that the students can say, I'm in a pediatric ward, I've got a young patient who has got a fever, pyrexia. Should I use paracetamol or acetaminophen, as you call it in the States, or aspirin? And we're trying to see if we can get that kind of knowledge in there too. But that requires a lot of close testing because these chatbots can hallucinate and make things up. So we need to make sure it's trained properly. So that's one project, and I like it because it's aimed to help nursing students, especially in Hong Kong, because they're under a great deal of pressure there. Shortage of nurses, they're trying to get more in, and like everywhere, a lot of pressure. So that's one project. Other than that, I've just literally this week been invited to take part in something called a writers' camp, and it's a virtual camp. And it's on a WordPress site. That's what I was putting up this morning, and organized by a really good old colleague of mine from the United States, who ran the International Nursing Association of Nursing Editors for a long time, Leslie Nichols. And she set up this writers' camp where people like myself, who are experienced editors and writers, can put up articles on, specifically designed to help people learn about writing, and also helping to coach people in their writing. So that's a project which is literally just, as soon as I heard from Leslie, would you like to take part in this? I didn't even have to think. It was, yes, if you're doing it, I'm taking part, and so I'm involved in that. So I really would like to try and help her to develop that site. And I'm not the only person involved. There's quite a few famous nursing academics and editors involved in it, and that is really it. The other life project is to try and retire properly. I find that very, very difficult. I'm 70 this year, and that's not old these days, and I'm very fit and healthy. But I think I've got, for the sake of my wife, I've really got to try and slow down and do a bit less, and not say yes to every invitation to get on a plane and travel somewhere. So I'm looking into that, but looking at it very carefully and cautiously. It's difficult to give up something you love. And a big part of my life, which I've had to leave behind, is rock climbing. That was a huge part of my life, and it's still there somewhere in my mind. But I can't do it now, not because I'm too old or unfit. I'm very fit. So I say to myself, I injured my shoulders, and they just won't do it. Pulling ups is the thing. I've tried again since I had some treatment for one of my shoulders, and it's just going to be too painful. But rock climbing was a big thing for me. I got into it when I was doing my PhD, because I did it in Sheffield University, which is in the middle of the biggest climbing area probably in the world, actually. Not the highest, but the biggest expanses of gritstone rock. And I took to it like a duck. As soon as I got involved, I thought, I love this. and I nearly thought about being a professional climber. I was good, but I wasn't just good enough. And I've climbed in the States, I've climbed in Scotland, England, I've climbed in Europe, so I've climbed a lot of places. And my children are two of them are very accomplished rock climbers, which makes me worry sometimes because I've had a couple of falls. But so that's one thing I've had to leave behind and compensate with other things. And so what I do now is run a lot, but not as far or as fast as I used to. I've never done a marathon. I've done a half marathon. I had to give up the marathon idea, but I do still run. I was running this morning, early in the morning, 2 or 3 times a week, and I take part in something called Park Run. Which there's probably one near you. It's a 5K race that takes place every Saturday morning, and it's worldwide, Park Run. Check it out. And I do that here regularly. I've done it in various places in the UK. I've done it in Singapore, and I've done it in Washington. I go to Washington once a year, and we run it on is it Jefferson Island, the island in the middle of the river. So we on the Potomac. So I go down there to do it with people there. So that's one thing, and also just generally trying to keep fit. So I go to the gym 3 times a week, and I'm lucky because my son owns a gym and does these amazingly hard classes which are designed for teenagers, but my wife and I go along and join in at our advanced years, and it keeps us fit. So that I think that's a big aspect of my life, is just physical fitness. Really, is just trying to keep fit and be fit for what life throws at me. Reading wise, I mean, I don't just read. I still have a huge collection of poetry behind there, which I dabble in now and again, but I try and read sort of projects in a way. And I've just read all the novels. I'm on the last one now of Neville Shute, Norway, or Neville Shute as he was known as a writer. He was British, but he became one of Australia's most famous writers because he lived in Australia for most of his life. He wrote On the Beach and Town Like Alice, which most people have read, and I love them. And I've just explored all his novels and discovered he had a very local connection here, because he was an aircraftsman, and he worked on the not the R101, but the sister ship to the R101, the airship, the one that exploded and killed so many people. But they were built near my city, and one of them exploded over the river here and killed many people, and he was on those projects. I had no idea an airship went down over our city between the wars. So anyway, so you read into these people, and you discover he lived about 20 miles away for a while, for that kind of thing. So I'm trying to work my way through those novels at the moment, and also plugging my own book, Dewdrops, which is the only haiku book I've written. It didn't sell as well as I thought. And what I do want to mention is my very good friend and nursing colleague, Sue Wei Hlai, with whom her name is spelled Sue Wei Hlai, Shell Aing. It's a Burmese name. I met her in Edinburgh when she worked in Singapore, and she's now in Australia. And we've kept in contact, and we've written many haiku together. She doesn't write so many now, but we put a book together.
Buttock marks on the wall. Light snow. Evening train racing its shadow home. Optician's bill, unable to read the small print. High spirits in the sanatorium. Infectious laughter. Glinting salmon, my world briefly, then his. Long rows of white stones, soldiers' last dreams. Northern Lights, don't spoil it with an explanation. Handing over the wrong currency, jet lag. A warm breeze wafts plum blossom into Rewa. First date. Online she had no accent.